When I was 9, I wanted to spend as much time with my father as possible. Whether pretending to shave in the bathroom with him in the mornings, going on bike rides along the Tiburon waterfront, taking in stunning views of the 70s San Francisco skyline, or watching a long list of must-see movies that he saw as his parental duty to pass on. These moments were even more precious in that they came amidst his striving to balance the demands of a large congregation with the longings of a young son. And so it wasn't so unusual that I jumped at the chance to drive with him to Yom Kippur morning services on that fateful day 50 years ago. I remember distinctly getting into the car with my father and watching him turn on the radio as the color drained from his face, and he gently shushed me to more intently listen to the news report. He patiently explained that Israel was being attacked by multiple Arab armies, surprising the still young Jewish state on the holiest day of the year in the hopes of accomplishing what they had failed to achieve in 1967. We drove in near silence as we listened to the pre-cable and pre-internet days when only news radio provided up-to-date information on faraway places. And like many rabbis in the world that day, my father scrapped his sermon, interweaving battlefront updates with the Yom Kippur liturgy to the world and worried and waiting congregation. Even as a child, I sensed the real existential fear that the state of Israel might not make it through the afternoon, its cities laying in ruins, its citizens killed or imprisoned as the gates of Ne'ilah closed on that day, and perhaps on the fate of our people. Despite monumental obstacles and unimaginable odds, Israel miraculously survived through the savvy, skill, and ultimate sacrifice of the Israel Defense Forces, as well as American support. But in the war's aftermath, there was a national reckoning, the Agranat Commission, a formal inquiry to determine how the valiant forces that had so definitively defeated those same Arab armies in 1967 had been caught so flat-footed and ill-prepared in 1973. This process of national tshuva, of assessment, criticism, and commitment to change found that a nearly lethal combination of intelligence failures and haughty complacency had left the military and the entire Zionist project of our people vulnerable to just such an attack. Vaunted politicians and generals were fired or resigned, and the nation's air of invulnerability was deflated as the state of Israel vowed never to allow its sense of destiny to obscure its awareness of reality. I do not think it is hype nor hyperbole to say that Israel today faces a crisis as dramatic as the Yom Kippur War. But now, the existential threat comes not from beyond Israel's borders, but more insidiously from within. For our beloved homeland is in a struggle to determine the essential nature of its national character and the true meaning of Zionism. Will Israel continue to thrive as a bastion of pluralism, liberalism, and humanism? Or will it descend down the path of ethno-nationalism, autocracy, and religious extremism? In so many ways, what is happening in Israel is happening here and everywhere. It is the conflict between, on the one hand, the liberal democratic order that secured our emergence from the ghettos of Europe, our opportunities in this nation, and the post-war world that bore the founding of the Jewish state. And on the other, the dark specter of a dictatorship of denial, committed to turning back the clock on the achievements and blessings of modernity, the freedom of the individual, the openness to the full tapestry of human experience, and an embrace of a vision for an evolving future. So how did we get to this moment? As with all things involving Israel, as they say, it's complicated. Israel has a parliamentary system in which forming coalitions with minority parties is the only way to govern. Sometimes these parties are quite extreme in their views, and they leverage their power to enact a radical agenda. And so, with ostensibly two branches of government, the only check on a unified prime minister and parliament is the Supreme Court. This is especially important in the current circumstance, in which the most strident, ultra-nationalist, and ultra-Orthodox coalition government in Israel's history seeks to impose its reactionary agenda to subvert the very foundations upon which the nation was founded and has flourished. And so, the current effort to disempower the Supreme Court is at its core an effort to undermine Israel's essential nature as a shining, struggling, and yet surviving experiment in Jewish democracy. In 1973, the singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen felt compelled to travel to Israel during the war. It was an inflection point in his life as a person and as an artist. Connecting to his Jewish roots through providing comfort to soldiers through song seemed a kind of sacred serendipity. Cohen described this trip to Israel as a journey to his, quote, mythic home. We all know what he means. There is the Israel shel Mala, the Israel of the heavens, the Israel of faith and dreams and holiness. And there's the Israel shel Mata, the earthbound Israel of realpolitik, social struggle, and tribal conflict. And so, at this critical moment that demands clear-eyed candor, we American Jews must separate the Israel of our ideals from the Israel that is endangered. We must put aside our illusions, our iconic memories of blue boxes and slots of quarters for trees that we imagine we might visit one day. We must peer through the gauzy nostalgia of blooming deserts and struggling underdogs and tanned kibbutzniks. These are wonderful visions of youth, dreams that planted seeds in our souls to embrace a liberating Zionism that is indeed the full flowering of Jewish redemption and identity. But the Israel of today, the Israel of hard choices and harsh realities, threatens the Israel of our loftiest hopes and our longing hearts. But at the same time, when the mythic meets the mundane, disillusionment can become despair. And so, perhaps my greatest concern is for the fraying bond between the American Jewish community and Israel, a worry that apathy or even antipathy will sever our timeless ties. This is far more than a cultural or political divide between nations. It is nothing less than a potentially catastrophic chasm weakening the essential binding force of our history, our sense of Jewish peoplehood. This force, above all others, beyond theology or practice or shared sacred story, is what sustained us through millennia of trials and tribulations. And the possibility of its irreparable rupture is an unprecedented threat to Jewish survival. The unresolved and ongoing Palestinian occupation has already challenged those ties, especially amongst a whole generation of young adults who see a profound disconnect between the policies of the Jewish state and the principles we've taught them in our synagogues and our schools, the obligations to pursue peace, to attain the dignity of all humanity, and to repair the world. And while we, their teachers and leaders, have sought to guide them in appreciating the complexities and nuances of a situation that glimmers with every hue of gray, with each passing day, Israel, under increasingly right-wing governments, has made it harder and harder for its defenders and advocates to argue that our two nations share fundamental values and views of the world. Many in the current government respond to our growing discomfort by arguing that this is an internal matter, that we American Jews who don't live in Israel should keep our mouths shut and our wallets open. Who are we, they counter, to say what another nation is or does? The answer, of course, is that Israel is not merely another nation. It is the realization of the great historic project of the Jewish people. And as renowned author, journalist, and recent temple speaker Yossi Klein Halevi contends, we American Jews have not only a right to speak out, we have an obligation to act on behalf of this national restoration of Jewish sovereignty. It is painfully ironic that the first legislative step to undermine Israel's democratic foundations occurred in the days leading to Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the commemoration of the destruction of the Jerusalem temples. For the rabbis attributed this tragedy for our people less to the power of the Babylonians or Romans than to sinat chinam, the wanton hatred and internal strife that seems to afflict our people again and again. But if we are to escape the fate of previous generations, we must learn from our past to inspire a very different future. There are two lessons from the legacy of Sinat Chinam that speak profoundly to the current moment. The need to rise above division toward unity, and the need to rise against zealotry and the hatred and violence that it breeds. Uniting the moderate, reasonable, and silent majority is more than a shallow kumbaya dream of reconciliation. It is a challenge that requires a selfless embrace of those who may have voted for the other side, but did not fully appreciate the consequences of their actions. It requires empathy to understand life experiences and priorities different than our own, to see another's motivations as not evil or ignorant, but rather as well-intentioned and as valid as our own. Israeli Rabbi Doniel Hartman envisions bringing together a broad coalition around a new social contract, one that inspires the cynical, excites the apathetic, and affirms the fundamental goal that we all strive to achieve: a better, more just, and more humane world for our children and our grandchildren. It is a pressing need and palpable dream, as much for the citizens of Israel as it is for us here in the United States. And one of the key forces that could cohere this new coalition is the backlash to the overplayed hands of the extremists. Nothing fires up the minions of moderation more than the arrogance of zealots and the excess of their schemes. And therein lies another more subtle lesson of Sinat Chinam. We learn from our tradition that what fractured the Jewish community of antiquity and evoked the ire of our enemies was religious and nationalist zealotry, the brutal imposition of narrow ideologies and the violence it incites against those deemed unacceptable, even and especially amongst our own people. This was truly at the core of the downfall of our people in ages past, and it is an existential danger that persists both in Israel and here in the United States. This convening of a broad coalition around a new social contract will meet the challenge of this moment, but it will also lay the foundations for a much grander rebirth of Zionism and revitalization of the Jewish state. And the courage to confront a zealotry whose only goal is to win, even if it means destroying the world in the process, requires an awareness that there will always be those who are irredeemably beyond reason and reconciliation. Their vision must be relegated to the margins from which it came if we are to survive as a civilization. And so, with the challenges and complexities of a situation that both strains the bonds of our people and yet compels us to act in its defense, what can we do here to secure what is vital there? Attending gatherings is important, like the one we hosted here a few weeks ago, and another at Herzl Ner Tamid this Wednesday. And there are organizations to which we can contribute, from the Kaplan Force to Brothers in Arms to our progressive movement partners in Israel. But these efforts must first stem from a basic realization. Rabbi Daniel Gordis has written eloquently about the importance of Israel for all Jews. His poignant plea provides a simple yet critical starting point from which to support our beloved homeland. Quote, "Especially now, it would be nice not to be alone. The first steps towards that would be to have those who love us and who want to support us let us know that they know exactly how fragile and how dangerous things have become. Anything else is simply not true, and perhaps even worse, leaves us feeling abandoned when what we need is precisely the opposite." If we truly love and care about Israel, we have no choice but to speak words of loving rebuke in a moment that calls for clarifying honesty. We must answer apathy and fatigue with action and faith. For the true character of a person or a nation emerges in struggle and strife, when the mettle of moral courage meets the trials of a generation. In the early days of the protests, as literally hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets, a proportion of the population comparable to millions here, a fascinating phenomenon arose. These fighters for freedom began to carry Israeli flags, transforming street marches into swirling forests of blue and white banners. But this was a gesture as meaningful as it was symbolic. So often bearing the flag of a nation has been associated with a kind of performative patriotism, a shallow display of national pride most often linked to conservative political leanings. So much so that those in the center and on the left have conceded hoisting the flag to the right, seeing it as an emblem of rigid and rhetorical nationalism. But the growing Israeli coalition, one that now spans the political spectrum, has done something as ingenious as it is vital. It has reclaimed both the flag and the essence of patriotism, not as unqualified support for anything a government does, but as an obligation, a mitzvah, to rise against this assault on the fundamental nature of a Jewish and democratic state, reaffirming the blessings of what Israel has attained and holding fast to the hope, hatikvah, of what Israel can and must be if it is to remain the heart and soul of our people. This reclamation of power and purpose of the flag holds important insights for we Americans as well, and for our proud and patriotic bearing of our stars and stripes. On this holiest of nights in the Jewish year, on another Yom Kippur of crisis and concern for our people, we join with world Jewry in this moment of tshuva, of reflection and return to who we are, where we are going, and what will become. Yet we also hold fast to that hope, so beautifully expressed in the final words of Israel's anthem, Liyot am choshi be'artzenu eretz Tzion v'Yerushalayim, that we will always be a free people in our land, in the land of Zion, and in the city of peace, Jerusalem. Ken yehi ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.